All right, so I'm Ben. This is Easton.
Hi.
And we did an indie lab that deals with meat.
Alright, so the purpose of our lab was to figure out the best way to get tender meat. So we tested like doneness, so like rare, medium rare, that type of thing. And we also tested a bunch of things that the internet said tenderize meat. So this is why is it different?
I don't know.
So just a background on like tenderizing, how it works. So when you cook meat, there is like fibers, I think it's collagen fibers around the muscle, and when you cook them, they contract and squeeze out the juice, and that's not what you want. That's when like steak ends up like being leather, chew texture, eat. So tenderizing is basically just different ways to break down the collagen. So there's like the meat tenderizers where you just hit it with a hammer. It just breaks everything. There's thermal, which basically does a chemical reaction where you just cook it at a high temperature for long enough. The collagen turns into gelatin. So that's like what happens in pulled pork and stuff like that. But that takes like 4 hours. And the last way is enzymatic, which is what we did. And that's using like different like enzymes found in plants usually that break it down beforehand. So like pineapple does that.
So this is our background. We've got a bunch of equations there. You guys all know most of these, except for this one, which we found because we wanted to try and find the specific meat of our steak. And we had to use an equation that, since we cooked it in a convection oven, we used like a convection heat transfer equation, which was interesting. And we'll talk about that more later. And here's just some more background. And then this is a kind of blurry picture, but that's our setup. We basically had like a meat chopping apparatus that would like compress the core samples of steak. So, and this is more of our like prep. That's all the stuff we used, and that's kind of a little short like procedure-y thing. And this is just a picture. So the way we collected data was we measured the initial height here, and then we measured how much it compressed when you released the apparatus, and it was allowed to like use the weight of the mass below it to squish the meat. And this piece of raw steak had really nice marbling, so I just wanted to point that out.
It's like $3 an ounce. I don't know if it's marbling so much. It's just
yeah. Here's more procedure for phase 1. Basically, we just cooked the meat to different donenesses, and we took 3 core samples at each doneness, and then we put the samples in the apparatus and measured how much it compressed it. And then for phase 2, we did the same thing, except we cooked them all to the same internal temperature and used different marinades of different vegetables that were supposed to help with the enzymatic tenderization. And we saw how those affected the shear modulus and the tenderness.
So our hypotheses were, as like the longer the steak is cooked, the tougher it'll be, because there's like the rule where it's like thumb and index finger is rare, and then as you keep going it gets tougher. So it's pretty consistent. This rare, medium rare, medium.
Spend a lot of time.
Okay. So, but and then the other one was we predicted kiwi would work best because that's what some PBS guy said worked best, and honey would work the least because people that said honey tenderized were the Honey Association.
Alright, so this is our data for phase 1, and there's a lot because we have 4 internal temperatures. This was rare, that was raw, rare, like medium well, and then these last 3 are like just like a brick. Like, I would never eat that steak. But anyway, like you don't need to read this, but these are our average values of the shear modulus, which is like what we used kind of to quantify the tenderness. And we did some standard deviation calculations too. So here's the graphs that are associated with this. And you can see like the compression versus the internal temp. It initially like compresses more with the raw steak, and then as you cook it longer, it compresses less, which is consistent with what's said like online and about tenderness and stuff. And so, and we just plotted that, and we graphed like the shear modulus, which is the shear stress over the shear strain. We use like FL over at the compression times the cross-sectional area, which we all found those values with photographic analysis and Wonder Pro. And these are our average values for each point. And they show a similar trend, but it's to the compression, but it's like the inverse multiplied by some constants pretty much. And we did the same thing with different tenderization methods, as you can see. Again, we averaged across each different method and standard deviations. Want to talk about this, or?
Yeah, but we basically just did our graphs. It's not really function. Can't make a function tenderizing method. But have a nice color coordinated bar graph over
like
here.
our
That's
piece
the most important one.
It's a really nice graph.
It's just
And it has scaled error bars that correspond with the standard deviation of each.
Yes.
So what does the consumer enjoy most? A high shear modulus or low?
I would assume that if you like your meat nice and tender, you would want a low shear modulus.
Especially with this, because it's chuck roast, it's really tough. You're supposed to it's supposed to be like pulled type stuff. You're supposed to roast it for a long time.
Yeah, it's a cheap cut of meat, so.
Suspiciously cheap.
And so here are our different, you can see each color corresponds with a different like thing that was used to tenderize. Surprisingly, the kiwi didn't do anything at all. While
PBS, that's worse. I mean, it's worse than not doing anything.
Yeah.
So
So
PBS,
I mean,
they
obviously it may not necessarily be worse, because you can see with our standard deviation there was a really widespread
I
control.
I think I have something about why kiwi
Yeah.
did worse.
So
Okay.
do you guys support cutting their funding or not?
No, we should definitely put more money into PBS. Their space-time videos are cool. Here's a big thing on error.
There were a lot of sources of error.
There's like a ton of confounding variables, and basically you can test whatever you want as long as you try and keep the other stuff constant. But that's why we just tested different tenderization methods and different internal temperatures, because we honestly could have gone so many different ways with this. And
there was another condition that we had prepared with onion.
Sorry?
We had another condition prepared using onion as the tenderizer, except we just forgot to cook it.
yeah,
It was just
we
in
found
the
it in
fridge.
our fridge later, so that was unfortunate. Because that's supposed to be pretty good at tenderizing. Anyway, this is when we, concurrently with those calculations, we found the specific meat of one of our steaks, and we didn't have enough data to do it with more than one. But basically what we did was we set the Q equals MCAT equation equal to the thermal heat transfer in a convection system. And we found that the specific heat is equal to the thermal heat, or convection coefficient, which is H, times the surface area of the thing the surface area of the steak, times the time that it took over the mass of the steak. And we actually got a range of H values from, it's listed in the background, from this other paper that was done on the H's found in an oven. And we found that the specific heat on the low end was equal to 1959 joules per kilogram Celsius, and on the high end is 3918 joules per kilogram Celsius.
0.97.
0.97.
Can you refresh me Waters C so that I can put this in perspective?
What?
What is the C for water? Because you're talking about steaks. I'd like to be able to compare it to
it's
water.
like 4,000 approximately, right? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that makes sense because they have a high water content, but there's also other stuff in there. So
Water is really high. It's just like,
here's the error we did on it. Just with our low bound, there's a 30% error, and our high bound on C, there's 39% error, and that's because I don't know. There's a lot of things that could have gone wrong, and yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's that bad, honestly, for our calculations.
So our conclusion was, so it was an interesting experiment to perform just because it's food, like food and science, sort of weird because like everybody has their own things about food. Like looking for tenderizers, everything. Well, there's going to be someone who says that tenderizes. But also since we're going to college, figuring out how to cook cheap things would be nice. So this was, we used the cheapest cut of meat they had at Schnucks. So it was $3 a pound. So that's,
I like
yeah,
that number more.
we use metric because we're not animals. But like, oh wow, that's unfortunate. So our hypothesis about the tenderizing as a function of like cooking was correct. I mean, that more, so it like wasn't surprising. We knew what it should have been going into this, but it served to validate that our apparatus can, if nothing else, rank tenderness, even if it can't accurately get a shear modulus. But our kiwi and honey hypothesis was sort of inverted. So kiwi ended up being the worst, and honey was like second best. And one reason the kiwi might have been the worst is because the guy said that he liked using kiwi because it's not as aggressive as things like pineapple and papaya. He said he's like left it marinating in kiwi puree for like a week without it.
What he meant was it wasn't as effective, right?
Yeah. He was weak. And then, so applications of further analysis. So we actually used the leftover raw beef from one of the conditions to make our lunch that day. So I made like a chimichurri sauce thing that uses vinegar, lime, and onion as possible tenderizing agents. And it worked out pretty well.
It tasted good.
It tasted good. It wasn't super tender, but maybe if we'd used lemon juice, which was the most effective one, it would have been better. So further experiments, so originally we were going to use sous vide to cook because that keeps like temperature constant throughout, but that you need like a $300 piece of specialized equipment. Yes.
So did you get any meat in those first 2 bites, or just tortilla?
There was.
We realized we should take a picture of it after I started eating. That's a good question.
One thing that probably messed it up was the meat was like had freezer burn, and since they're different pieces of meat, they were probably freezer burned to different degrees in different areas, so that probably messed it up a lot. That's it.
Thank you.
That's it.
I know you're one to ask a million questions, but we don't have time.